May 13th. This is a special meeting at the Darien Board of Education Curriculum Committee. We have one item on our agenda this morning to elementary K-5 literacy update. We are glad to have Amy and Jen here to give us a little, and Shirley, some updates. Just a little bit note about our next meeting. We do not have a meeting in June, so it will be for the next school year.
Hard to imagine. Thank you, Madam Chair. So good morning, everybody. We are really looking forward to sharing this update. It's hard to believe that Jen was just saying it's already the middle of May, and it seems like we were just kind of engaging in this district self-study and thinking about potential resources and a pilot and looking at our district data and considering what might be the best approach for us as a school system. And now we're nearly completing the first year implementation of that new resource. So we're going to give some highlights of that today. We're also going to talk about what we're looking forward to as far as next steps in the work and what our priorities continue to be. So, this didn't work last night. It worked a minute ago. I just tried it. You all saw me do it. All right, let's try this. I tried this morning.
It did work. I saw it. I saw it work.
She saw it. That might be easier. There you go. Thanks, Simon. Okay, now it appears to be working. Okay, great. Okay, so thank you for your patience with that. We're going to just start again anchoring our work into the district vision of the graduate, and also thinking about how everything we do, you know, literacy is the cornerstone of all learning, really. I mean, how our work in this area is really supportive of our district vision and mission. And really what we've been focusing on as a school system is not just responding to what was required in the K-3 right to read legislation, but thinking about how critical it is to build a coherent PK-12 approach to literacy instruction. So as you've seen this graphic before, and what this graphic really is communicating is that we want to be very strategic in our work. And when we're thinking about our work, you know, in all areas, but particularly as we're discussing literacy today, we want to be thinking about PK-12 alignment, beginning with our earliest learners in ELP. I was in recently, so was Dr. Falcone, in classrooms watching some play-based learning scenarios, and really the children are already practicing writing in the restaurants they were building, creating menus, and so that's so exciting to see. We also want to make sure that our work in literacy is rooted in what we're doing to make shifts and building a really strong framework for MTSS in the school system. So thinking about what is happening in the core, tier 1 with instruction, and then what will be required as far as shifts and how to strengthen and reinforce what happens in tier 2 and tier 3 for our kiddos that require some intervention or extensions as well. We've been very committed and continue to be committed to ensuring that we have general education and special education practitioners at the table when we're engaging in the work, whether that's writing curriculum, whether it's talking about instruction and practice, thinking about how we assess for learning, or as well, thinking about our professional learning plan, some of which Shirley and Scott spoke about last night. In this work, we want to make sure that we're growing not only teacher, but also leader capacity. We want to make sure that administrators have the capacity to know what high quality literacy instruction looks like, so that we're learning alongside our teachers. The opportunity to implement a new resource has really given us a chance to look at what we value as high quality instructional literacy practices. So that's been a real focus of our work this year. Of course, student learning outcomes. We're a very high performing school district, but as we were talking about last night, we want to make sure that our children that are already high performing continue to do so and are stretched, and that we look at those students that might be at tier 2 or tier 3 requiring some boost in what's happening in the core, get really targeted responsive intervention so that we can close gaps for any that exist with some of our kids. Something that I think I'm particularly proud of over the past 2 years is the teacher voice in the work. It's critically important. Our teachers are the practitioners that are immediately with our kids, that know what they need, that are able to not just teach from a resource, but really be responsive to the kids in front of them. And having their voice as practitioners and experts is incredibly valuable and necessary in district work. The other piece is stakeholder confidence. We were, wanting to make sure that we were responding to some feedback from not only teachers 612 about what was happening in the elementary school, but our families. And so it wasn't just the feedback from the state about writing and small group instruction, vocabulary and grammar. We were also hearing, from some stakeholders from their children's experience that there might be some gaps. So we want to make sure that we're reinforcing that stakeholder confidence. You've seen this graphic and you'll continue to. I'm sorry that on my screen, I can see it all the way across structure. I'm not sure why it's not there. But this is really, I think, something that I believe in very much. This advisory structure really demonstrates that through this approach, we have systemic leadership, inclusive of Dr. Byrne, myself, Shirley Klein, Scott, and of course, Dr. Falcone, and some building administration. And that the purpose of that group in leading the literacy work is that we're able to provide direction, provide recommendations to the Board of Education, help determine how priorities are set and resources are allocated. Simultaneously, we have a larger PK-12 steering committee. And that's because we want to, again, make sure that our work is not focused on just like 2 or 3 grade level bands. We want to make sure that we are thinking 30,000 feet up and 30,000 feet out. What's happening ELP all the way through 12 plus. And so that group involves teachers, not only leaders, but teachers from the different grade level bands. It also includes special educators and very importantly includes like speech language pathologists. We know how important oral language development is to literacy. So those folks are involved in that work as well. And then on the right where it says 3-6 literacy core review team, that is kind of the micro group that's focusing on the really tight grade level band priority work. And so we know that we've been focusing on K-3 literacy the last several years as a response to the right to read legislation. And now, while we're in year 1 implementation, we want to be looking ahead to see what is now required in grades 3 through 6. Engaging in a district study, looking at what practices are really working for us, looking at the curriculum, doing a gap analysis, also thinking about the experiences that our children will be bringing up from them in K-3 and how that might impact curriculum instruction, assessment, and professional learning needs in those next bands. And I've said before, you can imagine the reason why we're bringing grade 3 back is not because we're making shifts there, but we're continuing to strengthen practice. And we want that work to be so strongly connected to what happens in grades 4 and 5. And then simultaneously, 6th grade, we want to make sure that we're not creating a drop off in grade 5. And so we've talked about as the work continues, that box on the right, in its next iteration, will say 5-9, because we want to make sure that we're, smoothing out the transitions from those upper elementary grades into middle school and then dipping into the high school. So that's a structure. We have actually the same framework that we're using for MTSS for the same purpose. For large-scale systemic approach to literacy, I've mentioned several times, you couldn't count with all your fingers and toes how many times I say the word coherence. That work is critically important in our work from a district view. We've done some work this year, and Dr. Falcone will speak a little bit more about this, to create a PK-12 literacy vision, making sure that regardless of the level, we're all kind of growing in the same direction and toward the same intended outcomes. The revision work with aligning our curriculum, and that will happen as not only for elementary this summer, but we've also committed to some work in grades 6, 7, and 8. That will be right around the corner this summer, so that we'll open the school year with the scope and sequence and stage 1 resources, including resources and text for all of the units available for families on EduPlanet. Part of the work last year and the year before when we were looking at K-3 was that we developed a high quality literacy framework for instructional practice. And so Dr. Falcone has spent a significant amount of time collaborating with teachers and leaders in extending that for 4-5, as we know that the literacy development looks different in those upper grades. Thinking about auditing our instructional practices as we implement a new resource. A significant amount of effort has gone into a very comprehensive assessment audit. So we're looking forward to sharing that with the board today and in the year ahead, making sure that the assessments thinking about MTSS, right? They capture all kids, and then diagnostic assessments that dig deeper to make sure that we're able to provide those targeted interventions. And then again, of course, strengthening communication and transparency with our families. One of the things that we're looking forward to in the year ahead is being able to communicate more regularly and timely about children's progress as they move through the school year. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Falcone right now, who's going to talk more specifically about the work.
All right. As you can tell, we have a lot of wonderful things happening.
Jen, is your mic on?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. As you can tell, we have a lot of wonderful things happening. I just want to take a pause and just thank the teachers. I know it was Teacher Appreciation Week last week, but the amazing lift and energy that they've brought to the learning this year is very exciting and to be commended. And I'm really excited when we look at kind of what we've accomplished this year and what our next steps are, just thinking of the long-term coherent kind of plan we have. And the excitement around having coaches now going to be in place to help sustain this work is just all very exciting. So what you see for this year is really a start, which will carry over and continue into the upcoming school years. But as you know, we continue to focus on our teachers, right? We want to really build that teacher capacity. And we've been really focused on that through this high quality literacy instruction frameworks that we've been building. So all of our professional learning has really been driven from that framework. So you can see in K3, we've been really focused on the implementation for our new reading program. We've had early release days where there's been guided planning and collaboration to kind of really think about not only using this as a full program, but thinking of it as an instructional tool. And they've been spending a lot of time looking at those priority standards, determining what has to be taught and through which resources, and being really thoughtful and intentional as to what can go and what needs to stay. So there's been a lot of collaboration around that. We've been really trying to optimize our instructional time and linking that to the instructional framework. And we've also been really focused on implementing the program with more integrity, I'm going to change that word, than fidelity, right? Because sometimes based on those priority standards or the students that are sitting in front of you, you have to use your teacher decision-making and make sure that, you know, your whole group instruction is matching as well as your small group instruction. And we've also been focused on what kind of assessment tools can help us inform the next round of instruction. And one of the things we did was we shifted in our programming to looking at what we call these week 2 assessments. And what that's been doing for us is helping teachers pull these standards reports. Because as you know, this program is it's a looping program, it's a spiraling program. So what it's doing is it's collecting information about how students are doing on certain standards along the way. So it's really been able to help kind of refine instruction. In grades 4, 5, we worked very systematically on building a shared understanding of what effective grammar and syntax instruction looked like authentically. We aligned our practices. We did a lot of work on what pre-assessments look like, how to focus your instruction in small groups, and then how to carry that forward into the next round of teaching. They also did this work through a strength-based mindset. So what is it that a student is doing well, and how can you take the next leap in instruction there? So one of the things we knew that we needed to do as we got past the mid-year point was to gather some initial program implementation feedback from our teachers. So up on the screen here, you can see those are the different areas that we wanted to look into, right? Foundational skills, the decodable text that came with the program, how small group instruction going, what are the teachers' thoughts around the student practice resources, information on assessment and data, and just overall implementation so that we could really figure out where we needed to focus our next level of professional learning for the upcoming school year. So based on that survey, and it was designed as a levels of use data. So for example, teachers had to identify where they fell along the continuum so that we could really pinpoint what certain areas we needed additional training in. So the different areas of strength that arose was that teachers are really feeling like it provides our learners with a strong foundation skills and phonics routines. There's a lot more explicit vocabulary and grammar and writing instruction. They feel that the texts are highly engaging. They do feel like the resources are easy to use and could go to a pro and a con, there's an abundance of resources. And that's one of the things where we continue to navigate. And they do like the clear spiraling lesson design. It's as we've implemented along the year, it's become apparent. I think in the beginning, people were a little nervous that we weren't teaching to mastery and we're finding it challenging to kind of stop instruction and move on. And then as the year has gone on, they've become more comfortable with that. Areas of growth continue to be writing instruction. There is not as much breadth. There's not as much volume as we've been used to. So that continues to be something that we're working on to reinforce and enhance within the program. However, as you can see from one of the last presentations we did, the student writing, you can see a lot of growth in that area. Pacing has been a challenge. Again, it goes back to the amount of resources as we're getting to know this program and being able to make good choices about what can go and what has to stay. Pacing's been a little bit off, so we're going to continue to refine that. The assessments, it comes with a lot of assessment. And so we've worked consistently across the year to determine, okay, what pieces of information do we really need and what do we not have to give? So we continue to make adjustments based on feedback from our teachers. Resource navigation I mentioned, and because we're still working on deciding what resources could go, how to focus in on the standards, the priority standards, we have work to do with small group instruction and making time for that and being intentional. And so we have a lot of plans going forward for next year to focus in on that. Amy mentioned the core review team. This team has done an amazing amount of work. I've given you an update on the visions and the goals, and I'll share a little final version of it in a second. We've really looked at our current literacy practices in grades 3-6 as we're preparing to move into pilots for next year. We've developed a high-quality literacy instruction framework for grades 4-5. On May 19th, we'll have a full-day core review team meeting where we will look at our instructional framework and really determine, based on 2 different programs we're having come to present, which of the 2 we think would be good fits for us to pilot going into the next school year. And then you can look to see kind of long-term plans for next year and the following. All right, so one of the things that we did as a pre-K-12 group is we finalized our literacy learner outcomes. Actually, I think it was one of my first meetings with you guys. We kind of brought a document to you guys and you provided us some feedback, and then this resulted in a revised document through lots of thinking and collecting of feedback from our teachers. We created really 6 literacy learner outcomes that you can see here. 1 being purposeful communication, critical and curious literacy thinking, creative expression and innovation, independence and ownership in literacy learning, empathy and perspective through literacy, and valuing integrity and community engagement. And there is a link there if you'd like to see the full one, but you know, we did a lot of thinking and really want to bring this to life alongside our vision of the graduate and all that we are doing with our learners. The other, as mentioned earlier, is we focused on the 4-5 high quality literacy instructional framework. And I am going to just get some notes here because we did some very intentional thinking about what we wanted to keep and build upon from our K-3 literacy framework. But they're also, because these are different learners, right? We're now switching from learning to read to reading to learn and explore everything, right? So it's a huge shift for our upper grade learners. And so we wanted to keep clear instructional structures with explicit instructions such as mini lessons, modeling, feedback. We wanted our kids to be independently reading and writing to build stamina. We wanted to maintain small group instruction and MTSS supports for all learners. We wanted to keep all core literacy components, including comprehension strategy, structured literacy as needed, genre-based writing, But what we really wanted to do was to ensure that we added deeper comprehension expectations, critical thinking using evidence, a stronger focus on academic vocabulary and word knowledge, including morphology. We wanted more extended and purposeful writing connected to reading and authentic tasks. We wanted to emphasize more on speaking, listening, and communication, a greater emphasis on student agency through goal setting, reflection, and ownership of their learning. And we wanted more integration across the content areas. So that's there for you as a link if you wanted to explore more. But this work and this thinking of how we wanted to extend and move beyond the K-3 is going to be really critical as we move into the next stage on May 19th to really study these potential pilot programs, because that work will drive our ultimate decision making. All right, so on the 19th, just a little deeper dive into what's happening on that day. We're going to start off the day and really thinking about what the science of reading looks like in our intermediate grades. So how do we extend that learning and that frame of research up into our upper grades? We're going to be looking at 2 different resources, HMH into reading and the units of study. And then ultimately we'll be creating some pilot recommendations. You can see as a follow-up from the 19th, we'll have to finalize what these plans look like for the pilots. We'll have to determine professional learning and any supports and adjust obviously our curriculum scope and sequence and our assessment calendar based on the programs.
All right. So I mentioned earlier in my remarks the connection to MTSS, and we have a district leadership team and a steering committee that again represents staff across the system, all departments, all grade levels. And one of the things that we're actually coming into the home stretch with is the completion of an MTSS district handbook. That the next phase of that will be to complete the appendices before the end of the summer, so that we have really clear tools and resources that are used in the primary grades, upper elementary, middle, and high school that clarify what happens for strong, high quality instruction in tier 1, entrance and exit criteria, cut scores, benchmarks that really outlines the purpose and function of assessments, how we communicate with families throughout these processes. And when that is completed, one of the other things that we will look to do is to create kind of some companion family resources and companion tools for families to use. As we talked about last night during the presentation, really wanting to make sure that pre-referral and prior to any kind of need for specialized instruction, that we're really strengthening the core and we're exhausting all efforts with appropriate targeted interventions. So again, this is about the whole child. When we think about literacy, everything that Dr. Falcone was just talking about with tier 1 is connected to that high quality instructional framework that we're working on. And then again, thinking about the assessments that we're really intentionally picking and designing to measure student progress and ultimately mastery toward the standards. So that's all a part of the work moving forward. And one of the things I mentioned last night was the concept of data literacy. And so a significant part of our professional learning in the year ahead will be supporting our teachers and our administrators and our MTSS teams of teachers and administrators, and really using literacy to inform instructional planning. So that's part of that continued work.
All right, so just a little bit more on our assessment audit here. And so basically, we're trying to, with the mention of assessment literacy, right, is to get our teachers and our staff and our leaders really thinking about how to use assessment in a continuous improvement cycle, right? If we're going to be having this assessment data, we want to make sure that it's valuable and that it's impactful and that it's going to drive targeted instruction forward. And so we've been looking at really creating a more balanced assessment framework and really teaching into that. It's going to be a priority for us next year. And we're starting with this universal screener, right? And ours is AimsWeb Plus. And we did a huge review first to determine if that was the right tool for us. Ultimately, we landed on keeping and maintaining that as a tool, understanding that we need a lot of professional learning to optimize and make sure that we can use the tool in the way that it's intended. And so the universal screener will be given, so that's an entry point for all learners and that we understand where they are. There are growth measures that are identified, and there's a lot of other very important data that we're going to be able to really make use of. And then from there, we want to be able to look down and based on these results, and we want to say, okay, if our students are on track, we're going to continue with tier one instruction. So you can see how heavily tied in this assessment audit is to our MTSS work, right? It's a really critical tool to have to make sure that MTSS could be running the way it's intended. We'll use this information to determine, okay, there may be students with risk. In that case, do we have additional diagnostic assessments that need to be given? We're trying to think, okay, if the universal screener says our students are performing at a high level, do we need to do all of these assessments on all students? So we're trying to be a little more selective in making sure that we're getting the right information from the right learners. If they need to have additional targeted instruction, they'll be moved into tier 2, right? They might have an intervention to support them. And then also, as well as if they are at risk or below the benchmarks, they would receive tier 3 supports. You can see in the purple area there, really the foundation of all of this work is our curriculum-based and classroom level assessments, because those measures, many of them are in the moment that teachers are using to make those most important decisions. We do have some curriculum-based measures. So for example, interreading has assessments that come with the program, right? And they are tied to those standards. And that gives us information for future instruction. There's longer performance tasks. And, obviously self-assessment is woven in there, but we really want teachers to look at this as a whole and using the information as a part of a collaborative decision-making process. This just is a little digger deep into what families will be receiving next year. We are providing pretty intensive training for our teachers on AimsWeb Plus and making sure they understand the data. And then we're also going to be sharing the family report. This is just a sample of what families will be getting. And it'll just provide information to be a little bit more transparent so that the families have this information. Next year is another part of our continued focus on MTSS, using all this assessment work. Then the next obvious step is to focus in on what small group instruction looks like, right? So we're going to take all of that information and figure out through our PLC process, which we're going to work on refining along the way. Having teachers collect the data, analyze the data, plan for instruction, and then implement and monitor instruction. And we have Jen Saravallo, that's group that we've contracted for, that will be doing a lot of work with K3. Due to the pilot, 4-5 will have less time with her, but we will start. But obviously they're going to need time to explore the program materials and be more facile with those resources.
We discussed last night our continued commitment to growing Orton Gillingham Academy. So we did have, I think it was 23 general education teachers that were initially had the training to have the certification of classroom teacher, classroom educator. And as Shirley mentioned last night, we have a growing cohort of teachers in the special education department. So we have allocated funds and the good news of the budget passing the other night in FY27 to continue this really important priority area work for our district.
All right. And that brings us to work that's going on into the next school year. So we will continue to work on developing all of our curriculum in EduPlanet. And making sure that all of our resources are aligned in that way. We will continue to work within the pre-K-12 literacy framework and continue to reflect on what's going on in K-3, but also there'll be a heavy focus on, based on the decisions of the core review team in our grades 4 to 5 work. We will continue professional learning, and I hope you've heard a thread of data literacy and small group instruction. And then, of course, the excitement around building the coaching program will be significant. And really having the coaches hit the ground running and supporting these professional learning communities right at the start to build relationships, get to know our data. And we're continuing the great work with the MTSS framework. We have almost gotten a nice draft of the kind of core of our handbook, and we'll be working on the appendices. And always thinking and considering about the student transitions as we go from different grade bands. And of course, communications with our families. I think that is it.
All right, thank you, ladies. I just want to recognize, and both of you have already done this, but the work of the teachers in this, over this past year and the years prior, it's a huge lift, and I appreciate, and I think all of us can say we very much appreciate the collaboration and their willingness to, to try something new, because
Yeah.
teaching can be isolating and habit forming, and to be able to change is sometimes challenging. So just kudos to all the K-3 teachers for their hard work. Couple quick questions. Implementing the small group instruction next year, will that require additional minutes for literacy during the day? Or are you just going to rejigger how you?
So, great question. It's already part of our instructional framework, which then, I think you've seen in the past kind of how they had that framework with the minutes on the side. Yeah. So it's more refining implementation of the program to ensure that there's time for it.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember, we actually are going to have a resource with Jen Saravallo's group, who's been, research-based and focused on small group instruction for many, many years. She has worked to create alignment documents that take our modules from HMH and help us determine what different areas of small group instruction can be that tie to another resource that we'll have available for the group. So it'll be all refinement and really making sure that program implementation allows for small group.
It
Thank
was
you.
really kind of serendipitous because right when the board approved moving forward with the funding for HMH into reading, I received an email from Jen Saravallo talking about her work in alignment to the standards, the HMH modules and small group instruction. So as a really well-respected researcher in that area and practitioner, it was exciting that she was kind of dialed into that same work and looking at the resource.
I just wanted to be sure that, I love the focus on literacy, but there's math, there's social
Yeah.
studies, there's science, there's social emotional learning. Like there's so much that has to happen in those few hours of the day. So just I'm glad that we're being cognizant of that.
And there's also the maximizing the wait period
Yeah.
Yeah.
for small group instruction. We need some work there and we will be working.
I have other questions, but go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that. To that idea about the focus on literacy and, all the things that we're trying to get in there. At what point would we maybe consider if we needed to add additional minutes to the schedule, perhaps a second language arts block, or like what would that conversation look like and what would the data be that would prompt it?
We have I feel very lucky in our elementary schools. We have a very rich schedule in regards to minutes. I think probably one of the greatest struggles we have is we have a lot of pullout that happens with instrumentals and chorus. So, and although they pull on a rotating cycle, it can be impactful. I can walk into a class sometimes and literally half the class is missing.
Dream core subject instruction?
Yeah,
Wow.
because when you think about it, it's not possible to fit all those lessons in, right? It's
We need to look at pullouts
Yeah.
in general. And I know the elementary team has been working with Amy and Jen on that and thinking about ways. And again, it's also looking at the win period. There could be tweaks to how much time we have dedicated to win. But I think next year, as we go through year 2 of using the new resource and step into the pilot for 4th and 5th, if we do need to have conversations about modifications, I think that would be the time to do it.
So then looking at those pullouts, is that work that's going to be done this summer to adjust for the next?
Well, they're
school
working
year?
on the schedules for next year and they're
Yes.
looking at that. issue
I think it's a
specifically.
little more of a systemic. I don't think it's so much
Right.
what the elementary school schedule can do. I think there's more systemic conversations that
Yeah.
have to happen.
And then the other piece that's really important is we don't want to lose sight of the opportunity to develop literacy skills in the other content
Exactly.
areas throughout the day. So even mathematics, right? Mathematics requires, especially when you're thinking about deep concept learning in mathematics, it requires so many literacy skills. When we think about the social studies and science standards and how we approach that instructionally, we want to be making sure that we're having children transfer what they're learning in the more focused literacy parts of their day to the other parts of their day too, because the
Particularly
transfers were.
In elementary school, it's quite easy to do literacy within
Yes.
a social studies unit or within
Yeah.
a science unit. So making sure that that's.
And
those-
that's always top of mind is where, especially with, the new curricular being, knowledge building.
Yeah.
There are many themes that are related to science and social studies, and like, as we go forward, looking at science and social studies, where can we find those,
Yeah.
through lines?
How can you be efficient and make,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I have just a few things. Thanks for the great presentation. One was on some of the feedback from the program implementation.
Mhm.
Most of the areas for growth that I saw seem more just like getting adapted to the program itself, the materials. The one that did stand out was the writing instruction,
Mhm.
which was obviously the first one, and you touched on that a little bit. Can you just dig a little deeper into like some of the things you're doing? Are you augmenting that with other materials, or like how, because obviously writing instruction is critical.
Yes.
Just talk a little bit more about that, please.
Yes, so, again, to go back to that, the feedback that we're getting from teachers is that there's a lot more, consistent grammar integration on the part of the students, vocabulary, but the length of the writing and maybe the frequency of longer writing pieces is not what, we've been used to in the past. Now, for grades K-3, especially in, 2-3, we want that volume to increase. And so that's definitely one of our goals within the program, to figure out next year, as we move beyond year 1 implementation, how can we, where it makes sense, increase that volume of writing and the stamina. It is going to be a very critical piece of what we're looking at for these, potential pilots for grades 4 to 5, right? Because that is something that they're getting more of the core grammar and syntax and everything into the writing. That's taking away that direct instruction, if you can imagine, is taking away from some of the volume that's writing. So it's like a give and take as we're trying to build those foundational skills. But it will 100% be something that we're very intentional and thoughtful about when we're looking into what program is going to be a better match for our 4 or 5 students.
So in terms of that pilot, will it be a similar number of classrooms doing the pilot that did the HMH pilot? And how are you choosing those classrooms and?
Great question. We have spent quite a few weeks trying to figure out the best way of doing this. It's when you're looking at 2 resources, which would be a true pilot, right? So you can compare. It's challenging to do in a classroom setting. And so we're trying to figure that out. We'll determine that on the 19th, but we've come down to the point that it would be unfair for some teachers not to be involved. So, and we want all 5 of our schools involved. So we're gonna have some iteration of having teachers in every building experience each of the programs. And I think that final decision will happen on the 19th. But we've actually contracted with a consultant from Teachers College to help us organize Columbia University, really, I shouldn't say Teachers College, Columbia University. Emily Butler-Smith, who's done so much work in curricular reviews and implementation. And she's helped us design a day where we're, again, going to start off with science of reading for our intermediate, look at the 2 programs, help us analyze using our framework, the strengths and weaknesses, and then ultimately decide what this pilot is going to look like.
Have you already chosen the 2 programs to pilot?
So obviously HMH, we're
yeah.
gonna look at, right? And then the new units of study from Heinemann are the other resource for you.
And the other piece about the design of the pilot is we know that the pilot isn't just a means to an end. It's a really valuable professional learning
Yeah.
experience for our colleagues. So, again, especially because we're not just thinking about the tangible resource, we're really rooting the pilot and the district study and looking at the standards, looking at the progression, like learning progressions, looking at
instructional
our
framework.
current curriculum, the instructional framework, our practices for assessing learning. and then aligning that to continued professional learning needs. So that's another important reason for when we design the pilot, thinking about the breadth across the system.
John, I want to be sure that you don't have any questions. I can't see you. So if you have anything.
No, nobody wants to see me. But just just bad dad joke. Just a quick question about the MTSS handbook. When is the draft going to be available for us to kind of take a peek at that?
So that's the draft we're going to finish, really like the meat on the bones for the grade levels of the level bands, elementary, middle, and high, is work that will be wrapped up throughout the summer. So I would envision as we open the school year, there will be conversation around the MTSS handbook, our systems and structures, procedures and practices, and also, as I said, Mr. Dunn, in addition to what the board will see with regard to what are kind of internal documents and what we share at the board table, it'll be really important for us to create tools and resources for our families. And I would imagine, I think I mentioned this last night, we'll want to also have a parent university so that we can be really clear with our families. I was recently meeting with a parent group at, I believe it was Royal Elementary School, who requested more information for parent understanding about MTSS. So we'll look forward to sharing that as we open the new school year. And then we've also been talking about the design of professional learning that will be consistent and calibrated across the 7 schools. There needs to be district messaging so that we know that this is a systemic priority. It is not simply a school classroom or school-based priority, it's a systemic priority. So we'll be designing that as well, and we'll be able to comment on that to the board when we open the school year.
Thanks. Other question, Katie?
Yeah. So I actually, I want to go back to what we were talking about, a couple of topics throughout. So, to Greg's question about the writing, I am curious, to what you had said before too, about how the other subjects align with this, because, and how when you're saying that there's not as much time for the writing, are you talking specifically about creative writing? Are you talking about all writing?
So sorry if I misspoke, it's not the amount of time, we have the instructional time.
Mhm,
The program addresses writing differently
mhm.
than the instruction in our previous program did. So
So sorry, I heard that you guys are providing a lot of explicit instruction on writing and grammar, and that the teachers are happy
Oh,
with that,
thank
that is stronger than maybe
Yes.
what we were doing in the past.
yes,
So, but then you said that something about the content, that was not, I took it to
it's
mean
more of
output.
the amount.
Yes.
So they write less frequently, like there's not as much writing involved in the organization of the program.
Right.
So in past years, they would maybe have more volume, right?
Right, so we're talking about student output, right?
Student output, right?
Correct.
So now the quality in some cases has been stronger because they see evidence of the grammar instruction and spelling instruction and more explicit writing, craft maybe, right? But there's less volume. And so teachers, one of the ahas is that they want to see their students writing a little bit more volume and having a little bit more stamina, which currently they're feeling is not as strong
And I
right
think
now.
that stamina piece is really important
Yes.
as you
Go up.
progress.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So how
And
does,
as is the quality.
Right. Yeah.
so coming back then, how does that fit into the other subjects? And how are we looking holistically at a student's output at their daily tasks for writing, right? Are we looking just at creative writing? Are we looking at, like in the
Yes.
science
Great
unit?
Yep. So in just ELA, we obviously focus on opinion, information, and narrative writing, right? And those are the cornerstones of any ELA writing program. So, but within that, our social studies programming, which in grades 4 or 5, we'll have to give you guys an update soon. We have been looking at revising these units along the way, and through that revision, 100%, we are doing information writing. Actually, we were at a writing celebration.
Nonfiction.
Where were we?
revolutionary
Henley. We were at Henley, and
Research.
they basically were integrating within a writing piece multiple genres of writing, and it was fabulous watching the students bring to life the authentic writing and a social studies topic. So wherever we can, of course, we're kind of double dipping and making sure that their writing across multiple content areas, and that will continue to be as important, if not more important, as we kind of go through the grades.
And outside of the resource, that same week, earlier in the week, we were out at Oxford Ridge Elementary School. I think I mentioned this earlier at the board table, and we were watching the children as they were engaging in play-based learning scenarios. And one of the classrooms, the children they had been to the nature center for a field trip. So they had done some research about what a nature center is. And another class was doing the zoo. They had all kind of their own areas of interest that they had researched. But the point of it is that the children were developing plans for their play-based learning scenario activity work that they would be doing. So they were writing full play plans in kindergarten with complete sentences. So again, outside of the resource, and to your really important point, Katie, there's a through line, across the school day where we want to see literacy skills develop and come to life.
Great.
Yeah, just a couple more things. For the literacy learner outcomes, I see that there's a draft on here. Are you looking to iterate on that more? Are you looking for more feedback from the board? Or what's the process?
If you guys would like us to come back, we could start off our school year with that. Yeah, happy to do that. I'm trying to think, I think, Greg, it might have been you that had one,
I know we gave feedback sometimes.
Yeah,
What it
and,
was.
yeah, and so, it was, alongside, other teacher feedback and everything. So yeah, we could start off the school year with that.
And we implemented some of the feedback that actually became right.
Okay,
So
great.
sorry, before we jump off that topic.
Yeah,
So
go
I
ahead.
saw on the screen that you guys had like the draft, but my packet, that side of the screen is blank. Does everyone see it?
I can see it on
I
my
see it,
phone.
yeah. I see it on
Um,
my computer.
Okay, so I'll just
That's
maybe
so
follow up.
strange.
I'll just follow up
We'll
with
make sure
Cass
we-
about, okay, thank
There
you.
were links on
Yeah, the
it,
links are.
but it seemed like,
I opened them on a
I gotta check on my computer, but it seemed like they were linking to the same thing, but it should be two different things, right?
Yes.
So maybe
Okay,
it's just-
I'm just-
Oh, I see what you're saying, Greg,
That's not
the
it.
K, well, yeah.
I'll follow up with you.
Yes.
The work is linked here to the work.
So
we will swap.
we'll swap that out.
It's an error.
Okay. And then the last thing is more just a discussion point around one of my favorite topics, which is AI. And sort of not as relevant necessarily for the grade levels that we're talking about, but shockingly, like grade 6, my son's in 6th grade. Like I'm already seeing, I think as soon as the kids get access to one of these devices,
They're on it.
it immediately enters the equation, unfortunately. I was home with my son a couple weeks ago, and he was on a phone call with his friends talking about a school assignment for math. And they were, going through the problems and working together, which is great because they're on the phone and not like texting each other, whatever. My son doesn't have a phone, so there's no ability for him to do it besides on the phone. There's a group of them, that's good. What's
Yeah.
not good is they got to a problem where they were stuck on it. And they started talking about it and they couldn't figure it out. And one kid goes, "Oh, the answer is 17." And he was like, "Well, how'd you get that?" He goes, "That's what AI told me." And so like, my son was like, "All right, well, I gotta go ask the teacher how you figure, like how you get to it," because the AI wouldn't explain it to him. So some of the kids were writing it down, but it applies to math, but it also applies to reading and writing.
Yeah.
And just thinking ahead of like, how are we getting ahead of that? There's nothing mentioned obviously in your presentation about AI. Maybe the absence of it is a good thing. It's sort of topical. I mean, I even saw an article this morning, AI, the trouble with AI investment writing.
Mhm.
And it all talks about, why the reliance on AI kills the benefits of writing for both the reader and the author.
Well, one, I'd say that we're doing a lot more paper and pencil writing
Yeah.
and computation in school, and we're gonna see more shifts to that.
I
They don't have,
think you're seeing that in universities even.
Oh, yeah,
Going back to
yeah.
the blue
Yeah.
books and.
and we've seen,
Typewriters.
I mean, I know it's gonna sound bizarre, but the place where we see the lowest amount of tech use now is at the high school. You do not see kids with Chromebooks out at the high school
Right.
or laptops a year or two ago, you may have. I do know that the technology committee that is working on a 5-year plan, they're late stages of that. They do address some of those pieces
Okay,
within
great.
that plan, so.
As you were, talking about like
Yeah.
the amount of assessments, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking about like, there's assessments and then there's like what's in the assessments and there's how you're actually giving
Yeah.
the assessments. And that's sort of what triggered it in my brain,
Yeah.
but just making sure it's on the radar screen, my antenna's up. I think we all of ours should be up to making sure like there's ways to, you can't enforce stuff outside of the school
Right.
system, obviously, but within the walls to ensure that the kids are actually learning it, that, you know, we could do that
Yeah.
collectively.
And one of the things that been working with Tim, and it'll be a multi-year kind of endeavor, is taking the different threads and themes that are in his programming, but thinking about, so particularly like data literacy, right? And using those themes and making targeted lessons that happen within some of the science and social studies units, especially in grades 3, 4, and 5, where they don't have the scheduled kind of library block, and making sure that those key lessons, which can include some of what you're speaking to, are really integrated into our science and social studies lessons where they make sense. So.
I just want to follow up on Greg's point about AI, and I think that just very broadly speaking, how we think about that, how we communicate, how we work with students on that, I think it's really, really important for us to make sure that we are really intentionally cultivating a desire to learn for learning's sake. Because there's no question that AI is a shortcut, right? And it's here probably to stay. We could debate the bubble another time. But there's a really big difference between someone who has, you know, gone through years and years of that writing struggle and understands the process, right? And maybe using an LLM to like refine something, versus someone who is using it and never developing those skills.
Right.
So I think it's just really critical that we think about that vision of the graduate and
Yep.
how we tie back. Because I saw that, I know you put that, I pulled it up because thank you for putting this in the slide, right? And I'm looking like, well, where does that fall in, right? And some of that, you know, is probably in independence, right?
Mhm.
Like, can you do the work independent of technology and tools? Like, what's your curiosity, but also learning for learning's sake, right? And just like that self-improvement. So I would love to see that be a topic of conversation at this board throughout.
When I just, Katie went to grab, I was exactly going to anchor to the vision of the graduate. And really, if you look at all of those tenets, you cannot separate technology and artificial intelligence really from any of those, because, you know, children's use of AI, our use of AI certainly affects our communication. When we think about creativity and you're thinking about the joy of learning, or Greg, what you're saying is like, you know, being able to communicate independent, kind of novel thoughts that are not just necessarily spit out from the computer. So all of those tenets are really wrapped up into our work. And really, when you think about even the vision and the mission, we want to make sure that we're putting children out into the world that have just not mastered standards. That's not enough. We
Right.
need to send children out who are able to engage in inquiry, who are eager to problem solve, who are really looking forward to accepting challenges and being able to collaborate. So all of that is really integrated into the work.
And I would say that there's also the, you know, we've talked about it in the budget process about the reliance on Chromebooks and laptops, and just the committee talking with teachers about device usage has already reduced device usage across the levels in the system. And I think that we have to be really thoughtful. We can't get rid of devices. There are skills that kids need to have to be successful in life beyond our schools. And we need to have technologically literate students and graduates. But the thoughtful use of technology so that it is supportive and not inhibiting the full development of those important skills and the vision of the graduate is critically important. So I think you'll see as we move forward with that plan, some really good shifts.
And as we talk about writing specifically too, and that process and that struggle, I know it's come up several times at the curriculum committee, but we haven't gone into it yet. But I would like for us to, you know, as you are looking at the what the desired output is for students and how we can increase that and develop that stamina. I'd love for us to tie that conversation perhaps next year also into how we are using the cursive instruction, how we are teaching typing, again, for that holistic view of what does writing look like, and what does this mean for, I'm so glad you're here, Shirley. What does this mean for students who need some assistive technology, right? And how do we use it to their benefit, right? I had one other question back on a former topic, but if anybody else wants to go ahead. So I just wanted to come back then to the pilots for next year. And I wanted to ask about how those two resources were chosen and if that was already set in stone. It makes sense that we would look at HMH into reading for consistency and that's what we're using. I am curious why we're going back to units of study as a comparison.
It's not going back in those grade levels. It's what they're currently using.
I know.
So it's used,
I know, but I feel like we moved away from that because of one, the legislation, and two, that we didn't feel that it was doing what we wanted. So I'm curious why that's still in the mix as opposed to maybe looking at something else, you know, perhaps like UFly or a comparison of something that we haven't done.
So we would be looking for a comprehensive program, right? And so something like UFly is just too narrow for our learners.
and
So
it's primary.
yeah, it's just like a small little piece. And so looking at the framework, we wanted to really consider programs that address the full instructional framework. There has been significant revisions to the current units of study, specifically in the areas of reading, really responding to the legislation, even though we know that we don't have the legislation per se in grades 4 or 5. We still want that science of reading driving our thinking and what the programming that we have for our learners. And so there has been significant revisions. And then I think we've shared with you prior to me arriving here, folks had been piloting the new writing portion of the units of study, and there were significant changes that had been made to really integrate the vocabulary and explicit writing instruction. And again, those are things that we want to hold on to from our current programming, right, in K-3, and make sure that it continues into our upper grades. That program does address some more of the volume, stamina, some of the things that we know after reflecting on our K-3 program, things that we really want for our upper grades. And so we felt the value added was there enough to look at the updated version and look at HMH. We didn't want to throw in too many other variables just because it wouldn't make sense with the trajectory of our learning.
It's my
So,
understanding that the upper elementary units of study are quite different from
Yeah.
the primary, so. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? John, are you good?
I'm all good. Yes, thank you. Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. We'll move on to public comment.
We have no participants for public comment.
All right, may I have a motion to adjourn? Ms. Drag, seconded by Katie, all in adjournment. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.